Michael Jordan learns his childhood church is closing for good, then puts his foot down. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Jordan sat quietly in his office, the soft hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the desk as his thoughts drifted back to Wilmington, North Carolina, the place that shaped him, the place that held the roots of his character, and the place that had given him his first sense of belonging. It was where he had learned the true value of community, of hard work, and of the people who supported him long before the world knew his name. The phone call had come in early that morning. A voice he recognized from his childhood had broken the news. The church he had grown up attending, the same one that had been a second home to him and countless others in the community, was closing its doors. The reason was simple, yet devastating: a lack of funds. The church had once been the cornerstone of Wilmington's faith community, but now it was a place fading into the background of time, struggling to keep its doors open amidst dwindling attendance and mounting debts. The church, with its cracked pews and walls lined with memories, had come to the end of its rope. For Jordan, the news hit harder than he expected. It wasn't just the church, it was the symbol of everything that had helped him get to where he was today. His earliest lessons, not just in faith but in discipline, came from that church. It was there he learned the importance of commitment, of not only believing in something greater than yourself but of building something that could last. As a child, he spent hours there, listening to sermons, feeling the power of the community's unity, and understanding that everything he achieved wasn't just for him, it was for those who came before him, those who helped pave the way. He thought back to those days, the moments that felt ordinary then but now seemed filled with significance. His mother, Dolores, and father, James Sr., had always been there with him, sitting in those same pews, guiding him not just with words but with actions. His mother taught him that there was no substitute for hard work. His father showed him the value of integrity. And the church, the small, humble church, had reinforced these lessons. It wasn't just a building, it was a place where people from all walks of life came together, where they learned that success wasn't just about individual accomplishment but about contributing to something bigger than themselves. Jordan stood from his desk and walked over to the window. He gazed out over the city, a city that had watched him rise to the heights of fame and success, but a city that had never really left his heart. Wilmington was a place where he had learned what it meant to fight for something, to give everything you had, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. It was where he had been told he wasn't good enough to make his high school basketball team, and it was also where he had learned to prove those doubters wrong. But now, as the church's future hung in the balance, Jordan felt a new sense of responsibility. It wasn't enough to have succeeded in basketball. It wasn't enough to be the greatest player in the history of the game. The lessons that had shaped him, the values that had guided his every step, were things that needed to live on, not just in him but in his community. He couldn't let the church, the place that had given him so much, fade into obscurity. Picking up the phone, Jordan dialed the number of the church's pastor, the same man who had been there for him all those years ago. The line clicked, and the familiar voice answered. "Pastor Mike, it's Michael Jordan." "Michael. It's good to hear from you. How's everything?" "I'm good, but I just heard about the church," Jordan said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "I didn't realize things had gotten so bad. What's going on?" Pastor Mike sighed on the other end. "We've been struggling for years now. The congregation just isn't what it used to be. The younger generation doesn't seem as connected, and with the bills piling up, we've come to a hard decision. The church is closing. We don't have the resources to keep it open." Jordan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This church, this place that had been central to his identity, was at risk of disappearing. "I won't let it happen," he said, the words coming out with a certainty that surprised even him. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that doesn't happen. The church is more than just bricks and mortar. It's about the people, the memories, and the foundation it built in this town." Pastor Mike was quiet for a moment, clearly taken aback. "Michael, we appreciate the offer, but this is a lot bigger than one person. We've tried everything, but—" "I don't care," Jordan interrupted. This church gave me everything. It taught me more than basketball ever could. I'll make sure it stays open. I'll get the word out, raise the funds, whatever it takes. The conversation continued for another few minutes, but Jordan was already making plans in his head. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. His wealth, his fame, those were things he had earned through years of sacrifice and determination. But saving the church? That would require something different. It wasn't going to be about money alone. This was about community, about people coming together to support something bigger than themselves. And Jordan knew that he was in a unique position to make that happen. He ended the call with Pastor Mike and sat in silence for a few moments. The weight of the task ahead of him wasn't lost on him, but the feeling of purpose that settled in his chest was undeniable. This was something real. This wasn't about a game. It wasn't about stats or records. This was about saving something that had shaped him in ways he couldn't even fully articulate. The following days were a blur of meetings and planning. Jordan reached out to local business owners, influential figures in the community, and even some of his former teammates, asking them to help in any way they could. The goal wasn't just to raise money, it was to rekindle the spirit of the church, to remind people why it was important and why it had to stay open. Jordan took to social media, using his platform to tell the story of the church, of his upbringing, and how this place had given him a foundation for his life and career. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. People from all over the country began donating, but more importantly, they started to reach out with messages of encouragement, with stories of their own connections to the church and what it had meant to them. As the funds began to roll in, Jordan found himself at the front lines, not just as a celebrity trying to help, but as a community member trying to ensure the survival of something that had defined his childhood. This wasn't about making headlines, this was about saving a piece of his past, a piece of the foundation that had shaped who he had become. In the weeks that followed, the church slowly began to recover. Volunteers showed up to help with repairs, businesses donated supplies, and families came together to ensure the future of the place they had all grown up in. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when Jordan doubted whether it could all come together in time. But he kept pushing, kept believing. This was his fight, and he wasn't going to back down. Finally, after months of work, the church held its first service since the fundraising efforts had begun. The pews, though still worn with age, were full. The community was there, together, stronger than ever. And as Jordan sat in the back of the church, looking around at the faces of those who had supported him, he knew that this wasn't just a victory for the church. It was a victory for everything he had learned growing up in Wilmington. It was a reminder that, sometimes, the most important things weren't the titles or the accolades, it was the people, the community, and the memories that shaped you. Michael Jordan had done it. The church was saved. And in that moment, he knew that he had found a new kind of fulfillment, one that had nothing to do with basketball and everything to do with legacy. The phone call from Pastor Mike had set everything in motion, but the work was just beginning. Michael Jordan felt the weight of the task ahead of him, a sense of responsibility that pulled him out of his comfort zone. He had spent his life competing for championships, battling the best the world had to offer. But this challenge wasn't about winning a game, it was about saving something far more significant, a piece of his past, the foundation of his community. The church had been where he learned not just about faith, but about the values that shaped his character, hard work, resilience, and a deep sense of belonging. Losing it wasn't an option. In the days following his conversation with Pastor Mike, Jordan wasted no time in setting his plan into motion. He reached out to the people he knew could help, the ones with resources, influence, and connections to make this happen. He called local business owners in Wilmington, individuals he had known for years, and even some of his former teammates. He didn't just ask for donations, he asked them to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just a church, it was the heart of a community that had supported him long before the world knew his name. Jordan knew that the struggle wasn't just financial. It wasn't about throwing money at the problem. It was about reigniting the spirit of the church, about reminding people of what it had meant to them, and showing them that this was something worth fighting for. The church had been a beacon of light for so many families, providing not only a place of worship but a sense of community. For Jordan, the church wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of the values that had shaped his life. The first thing Jordan did was meet with Pastor Mike. They sat together in the church, surrounded by the familiar smell of old wood and the echoes of the past. Pastor Mike, though grateful for Jordan's support, was realistic about the church's future. "Michael," he said, "this isn't going to be easy. We've tried everything, but the funds are simply not there. It's not just about fixing the roof, it's about rebuilding the trust of the people. Many have fallen away, and they're not sure this place is still a part of their lives." Jordan nodded. He understood. The church was in a state of disrepair, both physically and emotionally. But the more he listened to Pastor Mike, the more determined he became. This wasn't just about saving a building, it was about preserving a part of his identity, something that had shaped his spirit long before he'd ever stepped onto a basketball court. "Let's get to work," Jordan said. "I'm not just here to write a check. We're going to make this happen, and we're going to do it together." That evening, Jordan started reaching out to his network, local businesses, philanthropists, and community leaders who had the means to make a difference. He didn't want to make this about his fame or his wealth, he wanted it to be about the people who had built this church and the legacy they had left behind. As he called each person, he emphasized the importance of what the church had meant to Wilmington. He told them that this was more than just a place of worship, it was a part of the town's identity, a place where the community had come together for generations. Slowly but surely, the support began to roll in. Donations started coming in, and local businesses pledged to help with repairs. But Jordan knew that the real work lay in more than just money. The challenge was reigniting the spirit of the church, reminding the community why it had been so vital to their lives in the first place. He realized that this wouldn't just be about fixing the church's physical structure, it would be about rebuilding the community that had once gathered there in droves. Jordan organized a series of town meetings, where he invited community members to come and discuss how they could get involved in saving the church. The first meeting was sparsely attended, and Jordan could see the skepticism in the eyes of some of the attendees. Many of them had heard promises before, and they were unsure whether this effort would be any different from the others that had come and gone over the years. But Jordan wasn't deterred. He stood before the group and shared his own personal connection to the church, explaining how much it had meant to him growing up. "I'm here because I believe in this place," he said, his voice steady. "This church helped shape who I am, and I know it's done the same for so many of you. It's more than just a building. It's a part of our community, our family. We can't let that go. We're going to bring it back, and we're going to do it together." His words had an immediate effect. Slowly, people began to speak up, sharing their own memories of the church, of the weddings, baptisms, and funerals they had witnessed there. It was clear that, despite the church's struggles, it still held an important place in the hearts of the people of Wilmington. The momentum began to build, and more people started to step forward, offering their help in ways big and small. Jordan didn't stop with just the community. He reached out to his former teammates, men who had achieved greatness on the court and had the resources to help. Charles Barkley, Scottie Pippen, and other close friends from Jordan's career were quick to offer their support. But Jordan didn't ask them for money alone. He asked them to come back to Wilmington, to help restore the church not just physically but emotionally. He invited them to witness what the church meant to the people of Wilmington, to see firsthand the impact it had on the lives of the community. In the weeks that followed, Jordan and his team worked tirelessly to raise funds, organize volunteer efforts, and spread the word. He knew that it would take more than just financial support, it would take a collective effort, a sense of unity and purpose that would give the church a fighting chance. People from all walks of life came together, from local families to businesses, to help restore the church's physical structure. Volunteers spent weekends painting walls, repairing the roof, and cleaning the pews. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was meaningful. As Jordan continued to lead the charge, the community began to heal. The church, once on the brink of closure, began to feel alive again. People who had drifted away from the church started to return, and the spirit of unity that Jordan had hoped for began to take shape. There was a renewed sense of hope in the air, and as the work continued, Jordan knew that they were on the right path. But the real breakthrough came during a Sunday service held in the freshly renovated church. The pews were full, the air thick with anticipation. As Jordan sat among the congregation, he could feel the energy in the room, the sense of pride, the sense of accomplishment, and the sense of community. The church was no longer just a place, it was a living, breathing symbol of what could be achieved when people came together for a common cause. As the service concluded, Pastor Mike stood before the congregation and shared a simple message of gratitude. "Thank you, Michael," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just save this church. You saved us. You reminded us that we're stronger together than we are apart." Jordan smiled, his eyes glistening. He didn't need any more accolades or praise. The church was saved, and that was all that mattered. This wasn't about the recognition, it was about the lives he had touched and the legacy he was leaving behind. The church would continue to serve the people of Wilmington for generations to come, a testament to the power of community, faith, and the unyielding spirit of those who refused to give up. As the congregation filed out, Jordan stayed behind for a moment, taking it all in. He had come full circle. From a young boy attending services in this very building to now being the one who helped save it. And in that moment, he knew that his legacy would not just be defined by championships or MVP awards, but by the impact he had on the people who had helped him become who he was. This was his true victory, the one that would last far beyond his playing days. The morning sun filtered through the blinds in Michael Jordan's office, casting a soft light across the room. His mind, however, wasn't focused on the work laid out before him or the deals he was making as a businessman. His thoughts were consumed by Wilmington, by the church that had helped shape his character. In the days following his commitment to saving the church, Jordan had been flooded with emotions, anger, determination, and even a sense of fear. It wasn't that he doubted his ability to raise the funds or get the job done. What worried him more was the thought of losing something that had been central to his upbringing. The church wasn't just a building, it was a cornerstone of his community, a place where he had learned so much more than the game of basketball. Jordan had been through countless challenges over the years. On the court, he had faced off against the best players in the world and had risen to every occasion. But now, as an adult with more responsibilities than ever before, this felt different. This was personal. This was about legacy, not just for him, but for the town of Wilmington and everyone who had once called the church home. The phone call he received that morning from Pastor Mike had made it clear that the church's financial troubles were far worse than he had initially understood. The community had been doing what they could to keep the church afloat, but it was clear they needed more than just a few donations to make it work. It was going to take something bigger, something that would capture the attention of not just the local community but the broader world as well. Jordan took a deep breath and stood up from his desk. He needed a plan, and he needed to act fast. The church wasn't just a religious institution, it was an anchor for the people of Wilmington. It was where the community came together, celebrated life, and found strength. It was where Jordan had learned to stand tall in the face of adversity, to be patient, and to value hard work and perseverance. These were lessons that had guided him through his life and his career. The first thing he did was reach out to his longtime friend, Charles Barkley. Barkley had always been a man who understood the power of community. He was one of the few people Jordan trusted to offer advice and perspective outside of basketball. He picked up the phone and dialed. "Charles," Jordan said as soon as Barkley answered. "I need your help." Charles, as always, was quick to respond. "Anything, Mike. What's going on?" "The church in Wilmington. The one I grew up in." "It's closing," Jordan said, the weight of the words sinking in. "I need to save it." Barkley was silent for a moment. "Man, that's tough. But I know you, Mike. If anyone can make it happen, it's you. What do you need from me?" Jordan took a moment to compose himself before responding. "I'm not just asking for money, Charles. I need help raising awareness. I need the people who know me, who know what the church has meant to me, to step up. We need to remind people why it's important." Barkley didn't hesitate. "I'm in. Let's do it." With Charles on board, Jordan reached out to a few other influential figures from his circle, former teammates, local business owners, and even some people he had met through his philanthropic efforts over the years. He knew that raising the funds would be challenging, but what he needed most was to get people to care, to understand that this wasn't just about one church. It was about saving something vital to the community's identity. Jordan called local news stations, reaching out to journalists who had covered his career in the past. He didn't want this to be a publicity stunt. He needed the story to be about the people of Wilmington, not about him. So, he arranged for a press conference where he would stand in front of the camera and speak candidly about what the church meant to him and to the community. As the press conference approached, Jordan felt a familiar nerve stirring in his chest. It wasn't the same kind of nerves he'd had before a big game, but the pressure was real. The eyes of the town, the media, and even the nation would be on him. This wasn't about throwing a basketball in a hoop. This was about ensuring that a piece of his past, something that had helped define him, would survive. The day of the press conference, Jordan stood before the cameras, his hands clasped in front of him. He took a deep breath and began speaking. "I've been asked a lot over the years what made me who I am. It's easy to talk about basketball, about the wins, the losses, and the moments that stand out on the court," Jordan began, his voice steady. "But the truth is, there's a lot more that shaped me than just basketball. I was raised in Wilmington, and a big part of who I am comes from this town and the people who raised me." He paused for a moment, looking out at the cameras, at the people in the room. "The church I grew up in, it wasn't just a building. It was where I learned the values that carried me throughout my life: hard work, discipline, and faith. It was where I learned the importance of community, of giving back, and of helping those around you. And right now, that church is on the brink of closing. It's not just about saving a building. It's about saving a part of who I am." Jordan's words hit hard. He knew he wasn't just speaking to the media in that moment. He was speaking to his community, to the people who had supported him when he was just a kid, dreaming big. The church wasn't just a part of his past, it was a part of everyone's story in Wilmington. "I'm not here to ask for money," Jordan continued. "I'm here to ask for your support. We need to bring this community together, just like we always have. We need to remind people why this church matters, not just to me, but to all of us." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of Jordan's words hanging in the air. Then the questions started coming, but they weren't about his basketball career. They were about the church. They were about the community. They were about what people could do to help. Jordan stayed after the press conference, answering questions, talking to reporters, and sharing his vision for what the church could become if they could save it. Over the next few weeks, the donations started to come in, but more importantly, the town of Wilmington rallied together. Local businesses donated materials, people volunteered their time, and the church began to see an outpouring of support that Jordan hadn't anticipated. He had known the church was important, but he didn't realize just how deeply it had been woven into the fabric of the community until now. The efforts continued, and as the renovations began, Jordan found himself back in the church, walking through its halls, remembering the lessons it had taught him. It was a bittersweet experience. The pews that had once been filled with laughter, joy, and tears now sat empty, but the sound of hammers and drills in the background made him hopeful. This wasn't just about restoring a physical structure, it was about breathing new life into something that had given him, and so many others, a foundation. One evening, as the sun began to set and the work on the church slowed for the day, Jordan stood outside, looking up at the building. He had started this journey with a sense of urgency, but now, as he saw the community coming together, he realized that the church had never truly been lost. It had just needed someone to remind everyone of its value. With the church slowly being restored, Jordan couldn't help but feel proud of what they had accomplished so far. The community was stronger than ever, and the church was, once again, a place of hope. What he had begun as a fight to preserve his own past had turned into a mission to restore something far bigger than just his memories. It had turned into a symbol of what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself. And as the weeks went on, Jordan knew that this church, this community, would live on. Not because of his name, but because of the people who had come together to make sure it stayed alive. They had fought for it, not just for the church itself, but for the values it represented, values that had shaped Jordan into the man he was today. The work on the church had started to gain momentum, but as Michael Jordan stood at the front of the building, watching the renovations take shape, he knew this was only the beginning. The church was no longer just a structure, it had become a symbol of resilience, of the power of community, and of the deep-rooted values that had shaped him. He could see it now, more clearly than ever. The church was going to survive, not just because of the money or the repairs, but because of the heart of the people who had come together to save it. Over the past few weeks, the support had been overwhelming. The initial wave of donations, both financial and physical, had been incredible, but what Jordan hadn't anticipated was how much it would stir up in the community. People from all walks of life, many who had moved away or drifted from the church over the years, had returned. Old faces showed up to volunteer, and new faces arrived, eager to contribute. What started as a personal mission for Jordan had grown into something much bigger, a movement to preserve a place that had touched the lives of so many. Jordan spent countless hours at the church, checking in on the progress, meeting with contractors, and coordinating with volunteers. But more than that, he spent time talking to the people who had come back, those who remembered the church in its prime and those who were rediscovering its importance. He knew that keeping the doors open was only part of the battle. The real challenge was to ensure that the church remained relevant, that it continued to serve the needs of the community, and that its spirit stayed alive long after the repairs were finished. One afternoon, Jordan found himself talking to an older couple who had been attending the church for decades. They had been members since the church had first opened its doors, and for them, it wasn't just a place to worship, it was where they had met, married, and raised their children. It was where they had celebrated births and mourned losses, where they had found strength in times of uncertainty. For them, the church was as much a part of their history as the town itself. "We used to come here every Sunday," the man said, his voice full of nostalgia. "Back when the place was packed, and the pews were full. It feels different now, Michael, but I can see you're doing something special. We need this place. We need to remember what it stands for." Jordan nodded, his mind racing with the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. The church was more than just a building, it was the heart of the community, and keeping it alive meant keeping the values it represented alive as well. For Jordan, the church was where he had first learned the importance of giving back, of helping those around him, of believing in something greater than himself. These were the lessons that had carried him through every challenge in his life. And now, he was determined to ensure that the next generation had the opportunity to learn those same lessons. That night, Jordan sat in his car, parked outside the church, staring at the lights flickering from within. He was exhausted, physically drained from all the work he had been doing, but there was something else weighing on him. The more he saw the church come back to life, the more he realized that his work wasn't just about money or repairs. It was about purpose. The people of Wilmington had invested so much in the church over the years, and now they were giving it everything they had to keep it alive. But they needed more than just a building, they needed a sense of direction, of vision. They needed someone to lead them forward, someone to remind them why the church mattered, why it was worth saving. Jordan knew that if this was going to work, it wasn't enough to just fix the church and hope people would return. They needed to understand why it had been important in the first place. They needed to remember the values it stood for and how those values could continue to shape their lives today. The next day, Jordan called a meeting with the church leadership and some of the key community members who had been instrumental in the restoration efforts. He had an idea, a vision for what the church could become in the future. It wasn't about recreating the past, it was about evolving and adapting to the needs of the community while staying true to the values that had made it great. "We can't just sit back and hope people will come," Jordan said as he sat at the head of the table. "We need to create something that speaks to them, that offers them something meaningful. We need programs, events, and opportunities that make people want to be here, that make them want to invest in the community." This church was never just about Sunday mornings. It was about the people who came here, who found strength and purpose. And we can do that again, but we need to be intentional about it. The group nodded, listening intently as Jordan outlined his plan. He proposed starting new outreach programs, youth initiatives, community dinners, and educational workshops. He wanted the church to be more than a place of worship. He wanted it to be a resource for people in Wilmington, a place where they could find support, encouragement, and guidance. He spoke passionately about his belief in the power of community and the power of people coming together for a common cause. "We have to be the example," Jordan said, his voice firm. "We've all been blessed with something, whether it's faith, talent, or opportunity. Now it's time for us to give back, to make sure the next generation has what we had. This church isn't just a building. It's a place where lives are changed." The room was quiet for a moment as the leaders took in his words. Then, one by one, they spoke up, offering their support for the plan. There were challenges ahead, they knew, but there was also a renewed sense of purpose. They understood what Jordan was asking of them. This wasn't just about saving a building, it was about rebuilding the heart of their community. Over the next few weeks, the church's new initiatives began to take shape. The volunteer programs grew, and local businesses donated their time and resources to help. The outreach efforts expanded, and people from all over Wilmington began to show up, not just for church services but for the events and programs that were being offered. Jordan continued to lead the charge, using his platform to get the word out and to encourage people to get involved. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks along the way. The church still had its challenges, its financial struggles, and its internal disagreements about how best to move forward. But Jordan didn't give up. He had learned long ago that success wasn't about avoiding failure, it was about learning from it, about pushing through the tough times and finding a way to keep moving forward. And that was exactly what he was doing now, not just for the church, but for the community that had helped shape him. By the time the church's first new event rolled around, an open house for the community, it was clear that something was different. The church had become a beacon of hope, a place where people could come together, share their stories, and support each other. The event was a huge success, drawing people from all walks of life, from those who had never attended a service to those who had been coming for years. Jordan watched from the back of the room, his heart full as he saw the faces of the people who had come together to make this possible. They were no longer just individuals fighting for their own survival, they were a community fighting for something greater. And in that moment, Jordan realized that the church wasn't just a place of worship. It was a place of transformation, a place where people could find strength and purpose, just as he had done all those years ago. The church wasn't just saved, it was reborn. And Michael Jordan, once again, had proven that his influence went far beyond the basketball court. It was about legacy, about giving back, and about ensuring that the values that had shaped him would continue to shape the next generation. The fight wasn't over, but it was clear now, the church had a future, and so did the community that surrounded it. The weeks that followed the church's successful fundraiser were a blur of activity and planning. Michael Jordan could feel the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders more than ever, but the sense of community he saw growing around him made it all feel worthwhile. It wasn't just about saving the building anymore, it was about revitalizing the community, about giving people a reason to come together and make something lasting. Jordan knew that this momentum couldn't fade. He had seen it before, in the world of basketball, teams that won a championship only to falter the next season. A victory without follow-up was fleeting, and he didn't want the church's revival to be just a moment in time. He wanted it to be something that would stand for generations, something that could shape lives the way it had shaped his. As the church's outreach programs began to take shape, Jordan found himself in constant meetings with church leaders, local business owners, and members of the community. His role had shifted. He was no longer just a celebrity making phone calls or raising funds. He was involved in the planning, the execution, and the vision for what the church could become. His life had been about pushing limits, and this mission was no different. It was about creating a legacy, not just for his community but for the future. One afternoon, as Jordan sat in the church's office with Pastor Mike, they discussed the long-term goals. Pastor Mike, who had been in the church for decades, shared his concerns about the sustainability of the programs. "Michael, we've done so much already, but we need to make sure that this isn't just a short-term fix," Pastor Mike said. "We need something that will keep people coming back, something that speaks to the next generation. These kids, your generation, are different. They want more than just a place to go on Sunday. They want purpose. Jordan listened carefully. Pastor Mike was right. The world had changed, and the needs of the community had evolved. The old ways of doing things weren't enough anymore. The church needed to connect with people where they were, not just where they had been. We've got to create something that feels like home to people, Jordan said. Not just on Sundays, but every day. A place where people can come to be themselves, to grow, to get the support they need. A place that offers more than just a sermon. Something that provides real value. Pastor Mike nodded in agreement. But we also need resources, programs, support for the community, something for kids, families, even for the elderly. The church used to be everything to this town. We can bring that back, but we have to be intentional about it. That night, Jordan left the church feeling energized. The challenge was clear. The future of the church wasn't just about saving it from financial ruin. It was about reinventing it. He wasn't just looking to restore a building, he was looking to restore a sense of purpose. The next day, Jordan held a meeting with the church's board and a few influential community leaders. The goal was simple: lay the groundwork for the church's future. This wouldn't just be about Sunday services, it would be about creating a hub for education, outreach, and community development. They brainstormed ideas for programs that could serve various age groups and needs: after-school programs for kids, fitness classes for adults, counseling services for those struggling with addiction or mental health issues, and even financial literacy workshops for the underserved. Jordan's focus was clear: the church needed to be a place where people could go to grow, to heal, and to connect. He wanted it to be a safe haven, a place that could provide support for whatever people were going through. And he knew that if they could get the community involved in the process, the church would never be just a building, it would be a cornerstone of the town, a place where people could build their futures together. The church's first new initiative was an after-school tutoring program for local kids. Jordan, who had always believed in the power of education, wanted to make sure that the next generation had the tools they needed to succeed. He reached out to local teachers and volunteers who were eager to lend a hand, and soon the program was up and running. The kids who showed up weren't just looking for help with their homework, they were looking for direction. Some of them came from broken homes, others from families struggling to make ends meet. But they all found a place at the church, a place where they could learn, grow, and feel valued. Jordan spent a few afternoons at the church, talking to the kids, helping them with their work, and offering encouragement. He was amazed by the resilience he saw in them, the way they showed up, day after day, eager to learn, to better themselves, to change their circumstances. It reminded him of his own childhood, the challenges he had faced, and how the church had given him a sense of purpose. Now, he could see that same spark in the next generation, and it fueled his determination even more. One of the kids, a 12-year-old boy named Marcus, caught Jordan's attention one afternoon. Marcus was quiet, focused on his math problems, but Jordan could tell there was something special about him. After helping him with a few questions, Jordan sat down next to him. "You're really good at this," Jordan said. "How do you feel about math?" Marcus shrugged. "I'm okay at it. But it's hard sometimes, you know?" Jordan nodded. "I know exactly what you mean. Math was never easy for me either. But the more you stick with it, the easier it gets. You've got to put in the work." Marcus looked at him, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "But what if it's still hard? What if I can't get it?" Jordan smiled. "Then you keep working. You don't give up. That's how you get better. That's how you win, not just in math but in life. I wasn't born good at basketball. I had to work at it every day. And you know what? I still do. No matter how good you are, you never stop learning." Marcus thought about that for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll try." Jordan gave him a thumbs up. "That's all I ask." The tutoring program was just the beginning. The church began to grow in ways Jordan hadn't expected. People from all walks of life began to return, not just for services but for the programs, the community events, and the support. People who had once drifted away from the church started to find their way back. The church wasn't just about worship anymore, it was about meeting people where they were, helping them with the challenges they faced, and giving them the tools to build better lives. As the months went on, the church began to thrive again. The outreach programs grew, and the community felt more connected than it had in years. Jordan's vision had become a reality, but he knew that the work was far from over. The church's future depended on sustaining this momentum, on keeping the people engaged and involved. The real victory wasn't just in saving the church, it was in creating something that would last, something that would continue to inspire people to help one another and grow together. The last thing Jordan wanted was for the church to become just another building or another organization that eventually faded into obscurity. He knew that the key to its survival was the people. They had to feel that the church was theirs, that it was a place where they could make a difference, where they could grow, and where they could find support. The true measure of success wouldn't be how many people showed up on Sundays, it would be how many lives the church touched and how deeply it impacted the community. Jordan's involvement in the church was never about ego or recognition. It was about giving back, about ensuring that the values that had shaped him were passed on to the next generation. He had always been a fighter, always pushed through the toughest times to succeed. But this fight was different. This was about preserving something much larger than himself. It was about ensuring that the people who had helped him along the way had something to hold on to, a place where they could find hope, strength, and purpose, just like he had all those years ago. And as he looked around at the faces of the people who had come together to make it all possible, he knew that the church was in good hands. The legacy was secure. The fight had been won. Months had passed since the initial wave of renovations and community involvement at the church, and Michael Jordan was beginning to see the fruits of the effort. The church was no longer just an empty building, it was alive again, filled with the sound of laughter, conversation, and the hum of activity. The after-school programs for children were thriving, the youth basketball leagues had restarted, and community events had begun to attract more people than anyone had anticipated. The church was becoming a center of hope and support for Wilmington, and Jordan felt a sense of pride and fulfillment he hadn't experienced before. But the work wasn't over. Jordan knew that keeping the momentum going was going to take more than just a few successful events. The challenge now was to ensure that the church remained relevant to the community, that it continued to serve the needs of the people, and that it wasn't just a temporary revival. The excitement of the restoration had begun to settle, and Jordan could sense that the next phase of the journey would require even more effort, especially if the church was going to sustain its growth in the long term. One afternoon, after a long day of meetings, Jordan sat in the church's quiet, newly renovated hall. The pews were filled every Sunday, but it wasn't just about the services anymore. Jordan reflected on the broader purpose of the church in the community. He had always seen himself as a competitor, someone who thrived on challenges, but this felt different. It was about making a lasting impact, not just in the short term, but for years to come. As Jordan sat there, thinking through the next steps, Pastor Mike approached. He looked tired but hopeful, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of seeing the church back on its feet. "You've done something remarkable here, Michael," Pastor Mike said, taking a seat beside him. "I can't thank you enough for what you've done. The community is thriving again, and people are starting to come back, but we've still got a lot of work to do. We need to keep this momentum going, but more than that, we need a vision for the future. We can't let all this energy fizzle out. We need a plan." Jordan nodded, his mind already working through the challenges. He had always been a planner. His career, his rise to the top in basketball, had been built on preparation, foresight, and understanding the bigger picture. This was no different. The church needed a roadmap to ensure that it wouldn't just survive, but continue to grow and serve the needs of the people for decades to come. "You're right," Jordan said, his voice thoughtful. "We've done great work so far, but we can't stop now. We need a long-term plan. We need to make sure this church isn't just a place to visit on Sundays, it needs to be a part of people's lives, every day." The conversation turned to what needed to be done to secure the church's future. There was talk about expanding the youth programs even further, reaching more kids, and offering additional resources for families in need. They discussed setting up scholarship funds for young people in the community, helping them afford college or trade schools. Jordan knew that education had always been a powerful tool for change. He had experienced it firsthand. And he wanted to ensure that the church was providing not just spiritual guidance but practical support for those who needed it. One of the other key discussions was about expanding the church's role in addressing the growing challenges Wilmington was facing. Jordan had noticed an increase in reports of addiction, mental health struggles, and general poverty in the area. He realized that these were issues the church could help address. It wasn't just about providing food or shelter, it was about offering guidance, counseling, and real support for people trying to turn their lives around. "We need to be more than just a place where people come to pray," Jordan said, looking at Pastor Mike and the other leaders gathered in the room. "We need to be a center for transformation. We need to be the place people come when they've got nowhere else to turn. And we need to give them more than just our thoughts and prayers. We need to offer them real help." Pastor Mike agreed, but he voiced his concerns. "That's a lot to take on, Michael. We've made incredible progress, but we're still a small church. We don't have the resources to do everything you're talking about. We need to be strategic about how we expand, and we need people who are willing to invest their time, energy, and money." Jordan understood. He had always approached challenges with a clear plan, and now it was time to put that into action. He made a commitment right then and there that he would do whatever it took to bring the church's vision for the future to life. He wasn't just going to stop at fundraising, he was going to help create partnerships with local businesses, healthcare providers, and mental health professionals to ensure that the church could truly serve the needs of the community. In the days that followed, Jordan worked tirelessly to put his plan into motion. He reached out to local hospitals and mental health organizations to establish programs that could help people struggling with addiction and depression. He partnered with schools to ensure that kids who needed extra help with their education could find support at the church. And he even began reaching out to potential donors who could help fund scholarships and community outreach programs. As he worked, Jordan started to see just how deep the need was. The more he listened to the stories of the people in Wilmington, the more he realized how much this church meant to them. For many, it wasn't just a place to worship, it was a lifeline. It was where they turned when they had no one else to rely on. It was where they could find a sense of belonging, a place to feel seen and heard. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Jordan sat alone in the church, reflecting on everything that had happened since he had first learned about its impending closure. He had come to Wilmington to help save a building, but what he had found was so much more. The church was about more than just a physical structure, it was about people, relationships, and the ties that bound them together. It was about giving people hope, a sense of purpose, and a chance to change their lives. Jordan knew that the work ahead would be challenging. There would be obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But he also knew that he wasn't alone in this fight. The community had rallied around him, and they were willing to do whatever it took to make sure the church stayed open and continued to serve. They had proven that they were capable of great things when they worked together, and Jordan was confident that, with continued effort and focus, they could accomplish everything they had set out to do. The next day, Jordan visited some of the church's new programs, talking to the kids who attended the after-school tutoring sessions and speaking with the volunteers who had been helping with the community dinners. The impact was clear. People were grateful for the opportunity to learn, to connect, and to receive help in ways they never had before. It wasn't just about the money or the building, it was about the relationships that were being built, the lives that were being changed. As the weeks turned into months, Jordan watched the church continue to evolve. It wasn't just a place where people came to pray, it had become a hub for growth, support, and transformation. He knew that it wasn't going to be easy to sustain this progress, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a deep sense of peace. The church wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And as Jordan reflected on everything that had happened, he realized that the work he had done for the church had become one of the most important achievements of his life. It wasn't about winning games or earning accolades, it was about making a difference in the lives of others. And in that moment, he knew that this legacy, this act of giving back, was something that would last far longer than any of his basketball records. The church was no longer just a piece of his past, it had become part of his future. And that, more than anything, felt like a true victory. As the months continued to pass, the transformation of the church from a crumbling structure to a vibrant community hub seemed nothing short of miraculous. Michael Jordan had always approached his life with a singular focus: be the best, achieve greatness, push yourself to the limits. But now, watching the success of the church's revival unfold, he found that the same focus and drive could have a different impact. It was about more than just winning a game or breaking a record. It was about creating something that would live on, something that would stand the test of time and serve those who needed it most. In the early days, Jordan had felt the pressure of carrying the weight of the church's future on his shoulders. It wasn't just about money or repairs, it was about restoring a sense of purpose, about reminding the community of what had always been at the heart of Wilmington. He had committed himself wholeheartedly, making phone calls, organizing events, and recruiting others to support the cause. But over time, it became clear to him that the real success wasn't just in saving the church, it was in seeing the people of Wilmington come together to build something far greater than themselves. The after-school programs were thriving, with more kids showing up every week for tutoring and activities. The youth basketball leagues had gained popularity, and families who had once drifted away from the church were returning, not just for Sunday services but to be part of the community that was being rebuilt. Jordan had worked tirelessly, but it was the collective effort that had brought the church back to life. However, as successful as the community outreach and programs had been, Jordan knew that the church couldn't survive on goodwill alone. The programs were growing, but so were the costs. The church needed a long-term financial plan that would ensure its sustainability. Jordan had poured everything he had into the revival, but now he had to think strategically. There was no shortcut to this next phase. It was time to think beyond the immediate needs and lay the groundwork for the future. Jordan called a meeting with Pastor Mike and the church leadership. As always, he was deeply invested in making sure their efforts would be sustainable. The church was no longer just a place for worship, it had become a resource, a sanctuary, a space for people to connect, grow, and heal. But it needed a steady flow of resources to continue its work. Jordan was prepared to help, but he also knew that the community needed to take ownership of the church's future. "We've made incredible progress," Jordan began, "but now we need to think long-term. We can't rely solely on one-time donations or fundraisers. We need a strategy, something that ensures the church can keep offering all these programs for years to come." Pastor Mike agreed, his voice calm but concerned. "I think we're all on the same page, Michael. But the reality is, we're still a small church. The community has been incredibly generous, but we need to build something more permanent. We need to start thinking about endowments, grants, and long-term partnerships that can help us grow. We can't just keep pushing people for donations." Jordan leaned forward, thinking about how this was similar to the mindset he'd adopted during his career. It wasn't about taking shortcuts, it was about building something solid, something that could withstand the test of time. He had built a career by focusing on the fundamentals and pushing himself beyond what was expected. This church, this community, needed the same approach. "I think we need to approach this like I approached basketball," Jordan said. "It's about building a foundation. We need to work with local businesses, set up partnerships, and even approach larger organizations who might be willing to fund specific programs. And we need to get people invested in the idea that the church is here to stay, not just for one generation, but for many." The group brainstormed different ways to raise funds and sustain the church's operations. Jordan knew that partnerships with local businesses could be key. He had seen firsthand how Wilmington's small businesses had supported one another, and he realized that the church could become a hub that benefited everyone. By creating a network of local supporters, the church would have a steady stream of funding, but more importantly, it would create a sense of shared ownership. People needed to feel like this was their church, not just Michael Jordan's. Jordan put together a plan to approach local businesses, not just for donations but for active involvement. He wanted to create a series of sponsorship opportunities where businesses could donate in exchange for visibility, participation in church events, and opportunities to give back to the community. The idea was simple. If local businesses could see the direct impact the church was having, they would want to invest in its future. As Jordan worked on his strategy, the church continued to serve as a lifeline to the community. The tutoring program had expanded, with even more kids showing up to learn and receive mentorship. The Youth Basketball League had grown into one of the largest in the area, with teams from surrounding neighborhoods joining in. The church had become a symbol of hope, not just for those who attended services, but for everyone in Wilmington who needed a place to turn. Jordan visited the basketball league one evening, watching the kids practice on the newly renovated courts. It was a sight that brought a sense of pride to his heart. He saw the same spark in these kids that had once driven him to excel on the court, the desire to prove themselves, to be part of something bigger than themselves. He walked over to a group of kids huddled around a coach, listening intently as he explained the next drill. "You guys working hard?" Jordan asked, a smile playing on his face. One of the boys, a tall kid with a bright smile, turned to him. "You know it, Mr. Jordan. We're all in." Jordan chuckled. "I like that. Keep it up. The game doesn't care if you're having a bad day. You've got to show up every time." He paused, watching the kids run the drill. They were dedicated, just like he had been at their age. He thought about how basketball had taught him the value of consistency, of hard work, and of showing up even when things weren't going your way. That lesson, he realized, was something he could pass down to these kids. But more than that, he could help them see that it wasn't just about basketball, it was about life. It was about what they were building at the church, a community, a team, a place where everyone mattered. The following weeks brought more good news. Several local businesses signed on to support the church's initiatives, pledging both financial contributions and in-kind donations. The partnerships Jordan had set up were beginning to pay off. The church now had a steady stream of funding, and the local business community was more engaged than ever. But Jordan knew that this was just one part of the puzzle. The true success would come when the church became fully integrated into the lives of the people it served. It needed to feel like a permanent part of Wilmington's fabric, a place where people felt welcome and supported, no matter their background or their challenges. As the year went on, the church's impact continued to grow. More families attended the services, more kids participated in the programs, and more people from the community began volunteering. It was no longer just about the church surviving, it was about it thriving, becoming an essential part of Wilmington's future. For Jordan, this wasn't just another project, it was something that fulfilled him in ways basketball never could. He had spent his life proving to the world that he was the best. But in these moments, standing in the church, watching the community come together, he knew that his true legacy wasn't just about championships or accolades. It was about the people he had helped, the lives he had touched, and the community he had helped build. This was the real victory. As the final months of the year passed, Michael Jordan found himself standing in the now vibrant church in Wilmington, surveying the changes that had unfolded. The church that once teetered on the edge of closure now stood as a symbol of strength, resilience, and community. It wasn't just a place where people came to worship anymore, it had transformed into a center for the entire town, offering programs, education, and support to everyone, regardless of age or background. The once worn pews were filled, not just on Sundays, but every day of the week with kids, volunteers, and families. The energy in the church was palpable, and Jordan felt an overwhelming sense of pride. The mission he had set out on was nearing completion, but the sense of fulfillment it gave him went far beyond anything he'd ever experienced on the basketball court. The hustle, the drive, the relentless pursuit of something bigger, those were things he had known throughout his career. But this was different. This was about legacy. This was about ensuring that the community, the very people who had shaped his life, would have a place to turn when they needed it the most. Jordan stood in the church, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the phone call from Pastor Mike, the first time he had learned about the church's financial troubles. At that moment, the weight of the task had seemed overwhelming. But with the support of the community and the partnerships he'd fostered, the impossible had become possible. The church wasn't just saved, it was reborn. Over the months, Jordan had learned that his role in this wasn't just about writing checks or using his fame to get people involved. It was about leadership, about guiding a community to rediscover their sense of purpose. He'd seen how the church had brought people back together, how it had given them a sense of belonging again. And more than that, it had reminded them that they could make a difference, that even in the face of adversity, they had the power to rebuild. The community dinners, the after-school programs, the youth basketball leagues, they had all become more than just events. They were ways for people to connect, to share stories, to support one another. Jordan had often said that basketball had taught him more than just the game. It had taught him about life, about perseverance, about teamwork. And now, the church was doing the same for others. It wasn't just about one person's effort, it was about the collective effort of everyone who believed in it. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Jordan found himself alone in the church, sitting in one of the pews. It was quiet now, just the hum of the air conditioning and the soft sound of footsteps in the distance. He closed his eyes for a moment and thought back to his own childhood, how his parents had taken him to this very place, how the church had shaped him into the man he had become. It was more than just a place of worship, it had been the foundation of his values, his work ethic, his drive to succeed. Now, as he looked around at the full pews, at the programs running smoothly, at the community thriving, he realized that this was the real victory. The church had become a place of transformation, not just for the people of Wilmington, but for him as well. It wasn't about the money or the recognition, it was about giving back to the people who had supported him, who had been there when he was just a kid with big dreams. As Jordan reflected on the progress, Pastor Mike walked into the room, his face beaming with pride. "You've done something incredible, Michael. I can't believe how far we've come. The church is alive again." Jordan looked at Pastor Mike and smiled. "It's not just me. This is all of us. We've got something here that's bigger than any one person. This church is going to be here for the next generation, and the next, and the next." Pastor Mike nodded, wiping a tear from his eye. "You saved more than a building, Michael. You saved a community. You reminded us all that we have a purpose, that we matter." Jordan stood up and looked around the room, feeling a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. He had seen so many people come together over the past months, people who had once been distant, disconnected, and unsure, and now they were all part of something bigger. The church had become a beacon of hope, and that was the most important thing of all. Later that evening, the church hosted a special service to celebrate its revival. The place was packed, and the atmosphere was filled with a sense of joy and gratitude. People from all walks of life filled the pews, many of them speaking about how much the church had meant to them over the years, and how Jordan's efforts had reignited that spirit. As Pastor Mike took the pulpit, he spoke from the heart. "Tonight, we gather not just as members of a church, but as members of a community that has come together to rebuild something precious," Pastor Mike said. "We've been through hard times, but we've made it through because of the love and support we have for one another. Michael, you showed us what true leadership looks like. You didn't just help save a building, you helped us find our strength again." Jordan stood in the back, watching as the congregation applauded. It was an overwhelming moment for him. He had never imagined his legacy would be about more than just basketball, about more than just the accolades and the wins. But now, standing in this church, surrounded by people who had been there for him when he needed it most, he knew that this was the real legacy. As the service continued, Jordan felt a deep sense of peace. This was his greatest victory, not the 6 championships, not the MVPs, not the countless records. It was the difference he had made in the lives of others, the impact he had on a community that had shaped him. He had given back, not just to Wilmington but to the values that had defined his entire life. Later that evening, as the service concluded and people filed out of the church, Jordan stood outside, taking in the view of Wilmington. The town, the church, the community, it was all connected, all part of his story. He had always been driven to be the best, but now he understood that greatness wasn't about standing alone at the top. It was about lifting others up, creating something that would last far beyond your time. The church would continue to thrive. The programs would grow, and the people would continue to come together to support one another. And as long as it did, Jordan knew that he had done something that would echo through generations to come. His work was not over, but the foundation had been laid, and it was something that would last long after the lights of the basketball court had faded. As the final service ended and the church emptied, Jordan took one last look at the place he had helped save. He knew that this wasn't just about the church, it was about the community, the people, and the legacy he had left behind. And in that moment, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was more than he could have ever hoped for, a victory that wasn't defined by any championship, but by something far more meaningful. It was a legacy of giving, of building, of never giving up on the people who mattered. This, he knew, was his true legacy.